there is no doubt that people empirically hit on all kinds of things, and it was only in much later times that the theoretical raison d'etre of what they were doing was gradually emerged and came into clear consciousness.
Speaking as yourself, speaking also as a member of your generation, how serious, how enduring was the impacts on your mind of Freud?
I was never as intoxicated by Freud as some people were. I mean, I thought, and I get less intoxicated as I go on. I mean, I think he omitted so much from his purview of human beings. I mean, this fact that he really leaves out completely out of account the whole physical side of man. I mean, to listen to Freud, you would think that man had only 2 points in his anatomy, the two ends of the digestive tube, I mean the mouth and the anus. I mean nothing else exists in the Freudian anatomy at all. And yet there is a good deal in between, and we know very well that there are many things on the neurological and biochemical level which profoundly affect our minds. But Freud, and although he did himself say that he finally all nervous disorders would turn out to be organic, but he did say that in the meanwhile, until we found out more about them, we could treat them successfully by purely psychological means. I think this is absolutely untrue. And his followers, of course, dogmatically insist upon this. I mean, in the most ridiculous way. The orthodox Freudians, well, thank heaven, most psychotherapists are not orthodox Freudians now. They are eclectics and making use of organic and chemical methods and psychological and sociological methods which guarantee a cure, which the pure Freudian doesn't get with his 8 years on the couch. More and more, as I learn more about what is happening now in the field of neurology and biochemistry, and in the general study of human physique and the classification of human types, I feel more and more strongly that you have to have the total organic approach. I mean, this is trying to see the thing as a totality. I mean, it's just, we have to make the best not only of both worlds, but of all the worlds. Man is a multiple amphibian who lives in about 20 different worlds at once. And if anything is to be done with him to improve his enjoyment of life, to improve the way he can realize his desirable potentialities, to improve his health, to improve the quality of his relations with other people, to improve his morality, we have to attack on all the fronts at once. And we have the greatest, what may be called the original sin of the human mind, is sloth, it's oversimplification. We want to think that there is only one cause for any given phenomenon, therefore there is one cure. There is not, and this is the trouble, that no phenomenon on the human level, which is a level of immense complexity, can ever have a single cause. I mean, we must always take at least half a dozen conspiring causal factors into consideration. And any attempt to improve human life has to take into account the psychological factors, the sociological factors, the physical factors, the chemical factors, all of them. Practically, you see, I mean, the trouble with the Freudians is that they took only one set of factors into account. Well, of course, their system doesn't work at all well in practice. So that this, as I say, is the sort of intellectual and scientific correlate of my feeling that the highest forms of art are those which impose a kind of harmony and order upon the greatest possible number of factors.
Don't you think that by the 19th century, by Victorian times, although there was all this injustice and horror, there was a beginning of social consciousness? There's a considerable drive towards amelioration of social conditions, and a lot of reforms took place.
I remember years ago going to look at the mummy of Jeremy Bentham at the top of the big staircase in University College in Gower Street, going with Schweitzer to see it. And one opens the door, and there sits this sweet little old gentleman he had a wax face, and his silvery hair which falls over his shoulder, and a bottle green swallowtail coat with brass buttons, and striped cotton trousers, and varnished pumps, smiling at one. And Schweitzer looked at him for some time and said, "Oh, I'm always so very, very fond of Jeremy Bentham. He's one of the few philosophers whose doctrines never did any harm, but on the whole did nothing but good." I thought this was a very interesting thing, and he said, "Oh, compare him with Hegel, for example," and sort of shook his head in despair. And it is quite true that if the tree is known by its fruits, well then the Benthamism is infinitely to be preferred to Hegelianism, which gave us Marxism and Prussianism and all kinds of horrors, whereas Bentham gave us Chadwick and decent sewage systems and proper municipal government and things like that, all of which are wholly to the good.
Won't you say something about D.H. Lawrence?
I met Lawrence during the war, and of course I knew him best later on in the last 4 years of his life, from 26 to 30. He was perfectly extraordinary as a human being. He was extremely fascinating, and he was always stimulating, a little alarming to be with. I mean, because he was very fond of my first wife, and we got on very well, and I think we were among the relatively few people with whom he didn't one time or another have a quarrel, and we saw, as I say, a great deal of him in the last 4 years of his life.
Why was he always quarrelling?
Well, he was a prickly man, and I don't know, I mean, he somehow did it on principle, I feel. No, I don't know, perhaps that's wrong. I don't know what it was a very strange thing. He would sort of burst out in this curious way against people. But it was always a pleasure to be with him and to hear his comments on things, his reactions to nature and so on were always very, very fascinating.
But some of the things he said seemed to me quite horrifying. For example, his resistance to the intellect.
Well, of course, I never understood his anti-intellectualism, all the more so as he was an intellectual. I mean, as a young man, he'd been a great passer of examinations, and he had a great store of knowledge. He didn't really like to say so, but he did. He was very well read. Of course, one of the things I often speculate, what on earth would have happened if he lived on to a reasonable age? It is, of course, it's absolutely extraordinary to think that this man who died at 44 produced this immense volume of stuff which he did, some of which is very fine, I think. I mean, I do think the short stories and some of the long novelettes are most remarkable, and some of the longer novels, I don't think all of them are successful by any means, and some of the later poems I think are very beautiful. But it's amazing to think of all this having been produced by this man who died at 44 and was sick for a great deal of the time. But where would he have gone from the point that he was at when he died? This is a very interesting speculation. I don't think he could have remained where he was, because, I mean, there's a certain ambivalence even in a book like The Plumed Serpent, where he's inviting us to go back to the dark gods and the blood and so on. But in the next breath he's saying how awful the Mexicans are because they're so slow and unintelligent and so on. I mean, it's a very odd book. I mean, you get the tirades against the Mexicans almost in the terms of an English colonel talking about the natives. In the next breath, you get then these tremendous invitations to sink yourself in the blood. So that there was even then a kind of ambivalence. I think he would have have come round to what seems to me a more balanced view. I mean, this whole thing that we have to make the best of both worlds. I mean, both worlds are in us. We have the world of blood and the dark gods. I mean, there was this curious, how many years was it? I mean, well, it was 8 years of wandering between 1918 and 26 when I didn't see him, because he was wandering all over the globe then, hoping to find this kind of promised land, which was obviously not there. I mean, he was very charming generally. I mean, he would sometimes sort of get cross, but he could be very amusing and entertaining. And he was happy. I mean, he was happy sort of sitting on a stone and I mean, very like, remember that poem of Wordsworth, Expostulation and Reply, sitting on an old grey stone, as he said. And of course a lot of his life was spent in this way, and then he would get an urge to write, and then write for 18 hours a day. I mean, it was very extraordinary to see him at work. It was a sort of possession. He would rush on with this, his hand moving at a tremendous rate, and never correct anything, because if he was dissatisfied he would start again from the beginning. His capacity for perception I mean, it was a great pleasure and instruction really to go for a walk with Lawrence. I mean, the sort of way he perceived the world was so intense and exciting. The point is that you must have both. I mean, the blood and the flesh are there, and in certain respects they are wiser than the intellect. I mean, if we interfere with the blood and the flesh with our conscious mind, we get psychosomatic troubles. But on the other hand, we have to do a lot of things with the conscious mind. Why can't we do both? I mean, we have to do both. This is the whole art of life, of making the best of all the worlds. Here again is one of these fatal examples of trying to make everything conform to the standards of only one world, which is perfectly, seeing that we are amphibians, it's no good. These were perverse sides of him, there's no doubt about it. But then I think he would have sort of gradually emerged from this curiously one-sided view of life and attempt to make all life conform to one kind of a pattern. I feel now that, obviously the sensual side of man is of immense importance, but again, this is the question of making the best of both worlds. This is the problem is, how do we get it, reconcile it with consciousness? How do we become fully aware of it? How do we integrate it into our lives? I mean, this is the important problem. And of course, it's interesting to see what has been done historically in this field to achieve precisely this. I mean, this is the interest, for example, of such things as Tantra in India and Tibet. I mean, this is an attempt to find means whereby the spirituality, quotes, can be expressed and discovered in terms of the ordinary processes of life, including the sensual processes. I mean, this to me is the supreme doctrine now. I mean, the whole Mahayana approach of the summing up of the doctrine which says that nirvana and samsara are one, the world of liberation and the world of appearances are identical, provided you can find eternity within time. I mean, people like Blake knew all about this and were attempting to do it, and this it seems to me is the essence of the art of life, that discovering these methods of finding, so to say, the absolute in the relative, the timeless in the temporal, the spiritual within the world of sense and matter. And I don't think it's impossible. I mean, I think that this is the whole art of living, which again is part of this thing which I feel to be supremely important, of making the best of both worlds, of